What's up, everybody? Today, I am super excited to have Mike Acosta from Real Talks on the Rocks on my podcast channel, The Ideal Hour. A little backstory here, guys. If you don't know, my first podcast was on Mike's podcast, The Real Talks on the Rocks. I've never done a podcast before. Mike has reached out to me and said, hey, I've seen your YouTube. I know you're in the Bay Area. I want to have you on my show. And it was just a pleasure to be on his podcast. He's such a great interviewer. So it's only fair when I finished my setup, I invited him on and asked him to be a guest. And it turns out that this is going to be his first podcast getting interviewed. And I think it's going to be great. Mike, thank you for coming. I am excited. It's been a while.
It's been a while.
I know you've been busy with your show. I've seen some great guests. I think this is going to be a good podcast. We're going to go into a little bit of everything, but mainly focus on what it takes to run a podcast and be an entrepreneur, have a second job, et cetera, and a little bit about you, because you're always asking the questions, right?
Yeah, this is a little different for me to be on this side. So I'm excited for the experience.
I think it's fun. I think you're going to find it to be kind of therapeutic, and at the same time, it's out of your shell. You're used to asking people the tough questions, not answering maybe some questions.
Go with it.
All right. So backstory: Mike has Real Talks on the Rocks. He started this podcast. He's also a Bay Area police officer. He's into fitness, entrepreneurship. Mike, why did you start a podcast called Real Talks on the Rocks? What was your intent for it?
That's the big question that everybody gives me, because as you can tell here, it's a lot to do, especially when you're on your own. This whole thing started for me probably pre-pandemic, when trying to figure out what more there is to do for others, and I was struggling to figure out what that actually looked like for me. Ultimately, I came down to the point where, especially in the job that I do and the people that I meet, you start hearing a lot of people play victim. They start saying, you know what, it's somebody else's fault. It's not my fault. I can't do this because of the government. I can't do this because of my parents. I was born a certain height. I was born a certain weight. It's everybody else's fault but mine. And that really got to me. It's like, okay, well, how can I make a difference beyond what I can do within the scope of my normal job? What does it mean for me to give back to others? And it was a big step. It was a big leap of faith for me to even try to do the whole podcast, because most of us would be the first one to tell you, putting yourself out there in public is, it can be nauseating.
Yeah.
You don't know what people are going to think.
Or say.
You don't know if you're going to offend somebody. And at some point you realize nobody cares in a good way. Nobody cares if you say something a little wrong, or if you don't really quite line up with their ideals. They're more happy that you did it. And then I started realizing, I respect more people who got the courage to go out there and do something that they believe in, rather than those who sit on the sidelines and say, it's not my problem, do something else. So I took the first step and did an audio-only podcast, and was really trying to figure out, okay, how does this work? Am I comfortable doing it? Is this really for me? And it was a perfect time during the pandemic, because we couldn't meet face-to-face. Everybody's locked down. Mm-hmm. So the idea of having to sit down across the table for a guest just wasn't in the cards then. But as I got more comfortable doing the audio-only version, and as things started opening up during the pandemic, I said, well, I really enjoy these long-form podcasts. Joe Rogan is the classic example of a long-form podcast, and what he's been able to do on his show was a great inspiration for me and a lot of podcasters out there today.
Absolutely. I think he the pioneer, I would say, of it. It's kind of, well, I would say Howard Stern technically was the pioneer, so to speak, but Joe Rogan just took it to a really different level, in my opinion.
Well, that was the thing about Howard Stern. With a lot of radio personalities, there's still that corporate oversight of what we can and cannot do. But Rogan was the first one
independently
to
blow up, right?
And the way that he did it, which is I'm just having a conversation with my buddies, talking about things that we like, just shooting the shit. If people, we'll just throw a camera on. If people want to watch it, great. If not, who cares? We still had a good time. And then it just sort of blew up.
And it's, what Rogan says matters. It's gotten to such a stature that, politicians want to come on, people that want to sell something want to come on. I'm sure he has this process of not letting everyone on when everybody wants to come on.
Sure,
you know what I mean?
He's got a process. But then getting back to why I did it, it was, what can I do that people, what is it that I really believe in that I think people my age, our age, the older millennials, you're
Sure.
talking about 35 to about 42. What are the things that we focus on? Because if I start talking about things that 20-year-olds care about, well, I'm not 20 anymore, so I can't really relate. If I start talking about things that 60 and 70-year-olds care about, well, I can't relate. So there's less of an interested point that I have in it. But what are the things that we care about? And the things that I care about and things that a lot of us do are our finances.
Yeah.
No one really told us how to manage money. We got the idea you're supposed to save money, but we thought investments and stock market, that's all for people on Wall Street. That's not for us regular people in the middle class.
There's no good education on money management, even today.
No,
I mean, people in school are just worried more about gender ideologies and all this. I just feel like if the school were to ever change, and this goes for you and I think we kind of came from a similar background, I would say, hey, there needs to be some education on the financial side of independence when you're our age, versus maybe focus on making sure not everyone's feelings are hurt or whatever it may be. But I totally didn't get to know what taxes are until my first paycheck came out, and I'm sure you're the same way.
I'll divert a little bit on this just to get this out there because I remember something that you told me from our episode is that you grew up in the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And it's funny how when you go back to that time, if some of us are old enough to remember it, when the Cold War was still a thing, there was a common enemy in that our enemy in the U.S. was the Soviet Union in terms of we have to defeat communism. So we were all sort of united on that and vice versa.
True.
Communism say, hey, we got to bring down capitalism. Once that went away, there was sort of this, okay, well, who's our enemy?
Yeah.
And then what do we do about it? Then 9/11 happened. Then we had a new enemy we had to go take out.
That's true. And everybody became united.
Exactly. Yeah. But once that sort of fell off the wayside, you start seeing what happens when there's no common enemy. There's a lot of internal fighting. People are saying, the race war thing, you got wokeism. There's definitely some truth to a lot of that, but it gets taken to a level where now everybody's just against each other. Social media just takes it to a different level. I just
wish everybody would just say, hey, man, I'm happy to be in America and I'm so proud and thankful. And like, where else can two people talk this way or set something up like you and I did? And in another country, we might be stoned to death, and in another country, it might not be approved. And I've seen and I've had guests on the podcast as well, in one generation from Mexico, from other countries, they've became millionaires and they're loving life. You know what I mean? Because no one prohibited them there here. So America, I love it. In school, I think they should teach finance. And that's why I kind of started the podcast as well, because I learned so much through such independent means, such as podcasts like yours, Joe Rogan's, or even YouTube, and finding someone that specializes in something. And I always stress on my podcast that, hey, there are people out there, if you really want to learn how to, say, get a Ferrari before you're 40 years old, there's somebody that's done it. Yeah. And they're giving you like a blueprint about it. And it's condensed into like 12 minutes. And that doesn't mean you're going to get one. But if you don't watch it, you're not going to know how this person got it. And there are things where if you want to learn about something, YouTube has it. And for me, YouTube's been such a monumental thing in my personal development. That's why I have it. And it seems that you're kind of in line with that.
Well, you mentioned something about the finances that I think is so important. When we're 20, and I think we can both relate to this, when you're that young, it is all about how you showcase your wealth. Yeah. So we know people, and I've done my fair share of this, when you're that age, you just want to get all the toys. You want to get the nice car. You want to get the jewelry, the new clothes. You want to get your status up there because you know if you do, as a 20-some-year-old, that's going to bring you a lot of popularity, which means you're going to get a lot of what a lot of guys really want at that age. Then you get older, our age, 35, 40, and all of a sudden that BMW M3 is nice, but it doesn't have the same appeal that it did when you were 20.
It doesn't give you that oomph, that excitement. I agree with you.
Yeah, you've been there, done that. Yeah. And somebody told me that this one's that all the wealthy people in the world drive your Toyota Corollas, they drive your Honda Civics because that's how they stay wealthy. They're not dumping their money into extravagant cars. I know that that's a big piece.
Out here for sure, the Bay Area, guys. And for all of you watching, it's the reverse effect, say in Miami or Los Angeles. But out here, the people will have a hoopty, which we used to call it, right? And hoopty is like an old car. And they'll drive this old car, but they have like a $10 million house.
Yeah.
And in LA, they'll have a $500,000 car, but they're going to pull up into an apartment In Miami, I think because it was such a retirement community, when I go there, I see just wealth even bigger than Los Angeles because a lot of those people are retired with their money. They still like to enjoy nice things. I think it's more acceptable there as well to enjoy nice things where it's kind of common. You'll see like 10 Bentleys on the freeway on your way to work or 10 Rolls Royces. Here you see that, you're like, who is that? And it's also, I would say, dangerous here to do that because, we could get into it a little bit further, but people follow people home if they see things. I'm sure you know even more.
If you've lost too much, you're just asking for it.
Yeah.
Going back to the really fast, you asked me why I did the podcast. Yeah. So the finances was a big one where I said a lot of people, they want that help. They have no clue who to ask, what to talk about. The idea of investments and retirement accounts is foreign to most people. Mm-hmm. It was told to me when I was 20 and I over my head, didn't understand it, thought I would have plenty of time to worry about it later. Now's later. And now this is where I'm saying people my age want to hear about this. Yeah. And if I can reach out to those who have that advice and bring them on, that's fulfilling my need to help out others who have a real need to fix their finances. Yeah. And then it goes into the other parts that I focus on, fitness. That's a huge thing in today's world. It's beyond the aesthetics now for us at our age. It's more about how you're going to stay healthy. We have to live, we have so much more education on what we put into our bodies in terms of food and how we work out.
Absolutely.
But you start seeing the generation before us when they're getting into their 60s, 70s, and 80s, and they just start getting frail.
Yeah.
And they don't take care of themselves.
I just saw Veronica sent me a 91-year-old man who just got like Mr. Olympia or something like this.
Yeah, those are inspiration
on
stories.
Instagram, I was like, dude, this guy is awesome. What I mean? Like 91 years old.
But he's the exception. He
is the exception.
It's just, and then you can, if you really want to get into the whole healthcare system and then just the drain on that, it's people have to learn how to take care of themselves. And we have the tools nowadays with everything you see on YouTube, what you eat and how to work out. Yep. You have the ability to do it. But for a lot of people, it's overwhelming. Where do I start? Is it this trainer? Do I do this? Do I do keto? Whatever. So if I can help narrow the field to make it as easy as possible to give you the information, you decide what do these guests have that you want and what you don't want to listen to. That's up to you. But at least I can do my best to provide that information out there.
That's awesome.
And there's so much of that because when you combine finance and fitness, it gets to the big problem that I think that we're seeing in today's day and age is this whole talk about mental health.
Yeah, that's a big one, right?
It's a huge one. Yeah. depression, self-esteem.
Let me ask you about that. And sorry to interrupt. How often, and I've had quite a few guests, how often does depression get brought up in your podcast? Because we're on mental health right now, and it's why you want to help people.
It comes up, more frequently than we think. Mm-hmm. We try to, the way that we bring it up at my show is we try to tell people that this might be the reason why you could be feeling this way. Yeah. And here's what it's related to. And in my experience, a lot of that for me, it's not for everybody, but for me, I've seen a lot of that coming down to finances. If you put yourself in a hole too early, too much, too fast, just trying to get out of that, you sort of lock yourself into maybe you have to work that desk job at Google that you don't like anymore, but you have to stay there because it's paying the bills. Yeah. You can't afford to leave it, go get education in a trade and do something else that you kind of want to do. Or, I've always wanted to work on airplanes, but I can't do it because I got bills to pay. So I got to stay at Google or whatever it is. And if you lose that freedom, it really affects your mental health because you sort of feel trapped. Like, okay, I'm stuck with this. And no disrespect to anybody who works at Google or has a job like that. Many people do it and they enjoy it. Yeah. But there are some people out there that have no other choice. They need that paycheck. And then it gets into this spiral that they're not sure.
Yeah, I would say Google is a great company to actually work for because I've seen their offices, great buffets and lunches and all this. But I would say you're more talking about like you being just stuck in a job, whether or not you like it. Maybe not as rewarding as some of the best companies out there, but just not being able to be creative outside of it because you're so confined to the amount of time you have in the day and you're so stressed out about these bills. And living in the Bay Area, I mean, the bills keep coming, right? It's not a joke. All right, let's stick to the podcast. And I appreciate you sharing with everyone that's listening why you started it. Seems like mental health is big, finances. We definitely didn't learn. I would say physical health when we were younger was a more prominent or important thing in PE versus today. So I think we
can get into that one too.
The youth kind of lost what physical health is. And if you look at pictures like in the 50s compared to today, people were in shape. And now it's like,
Well, we used to go out and play as kids.
Yeah.
It used to be go out, ride your bike.
Yeah.
You and your buddies would meet up at the local playground. You'd fall, scratch yourself up on the tan bark,
Yep.
and you'd keep running around, have fun. And nowadays, for better or for worse, we have this technology, these
you're
cell
glued to it.
phones.
And now it's on your face. Remember,
That's-
like Elon Musk said, my mom used to tell me not to sit close to the TV. Now the TV's
That's
on your
right
eyes.
there. Yeah, that's
It's
mind-blowing.
insane. All right. So what are some of the challenges you face starting your podcast? You mentioned earlier that getting on TV was a big one, and for me as well, or being out in the space. But what are some of the challenges?
That's the big one at first, is that stage fright. That first step that you're putting yourself out there in the public view. You don't know if people are going to listen, if they care. You don't know if you're going to offend somebody, which to me, the more honest you are about what you believe in, you're going to have your fair share of people that don't like you. That's actually a good thing, because in order for people to really care about what you believe in, you're going to have the haters that come out and say, no,
sure.
I'd rather have that than people who are indifferent, who just don't care either way. Because that means I'm not doing something right.
Yeah.
But that
you're not either tickling this fancy or that fancy, or not getting their attention
right.
the right
Now
way.
there's a wrong way to do it. If you want to get really extreme and have these really extreme views, whether it's politics or race or whatnot, then that's a whole different topic. That means I can't accuse anybody of doing this, but maybe you're doing that because you know it's going to get you the most likes, the most clicks.
Yeah.
That's a whole separate thing. But for me, it's you have to be willing to put yourself out there and give people the good information. Some people aren't going to like it. Some people don't care about it. But there's going to be people who are like, you know what? That's exactly the question I've been wanting to ask, and I had no clue who to ask. So it's either just to throw my hands up and say whatever.
I find marketing to be marketing, but one thing, and there's negative, like you could get negative attention by calling people names out there and they'll respond, or positive, et cetera. But at the end of the day, it's consistency, right? The people that keep doing the same thing over and over, they keep getting attention.
Yep.
How do you juggle? Like, I've done this podcast, the editing, and this is not my day job. I would say it's not your day job either. As mentioned earlier, you're in the police force. How the hell do you juggle editing, scheduling, getting people on the show, listening to them? Like, how do you do this and still maintain a job? For me, that's inspiring. And I think that should inspire other people, because this goes back to what you said. You feel stuck in your job because you got to pay your bills. I'm not saying that's you, but you do have a 9-to-5 job in most cases, or sometimes even more. But you pivoted and you created something that you could take with you in the future and so forth. How do you find time to do that? What motivates you to do that?
I don't know where the time comes from, because if anybody is familiar with the environment now for law enforcement, it is extremely challenging.
Very.
Every department is severely understaffed. My department is no exception. We have to work a lot of hours because there's just nobody else to work. So it definitely messes with your sleep schedule, but things have to get done. And I'm definitely very happy to do that, because you want to be a part of a team and you guys are working together to try and get new people on and get them trained up, so it makes everybody's life easier. But it is a challenge just finding time from that. But probably one of the things that make it easier for me is I don't have children. So that's a big time
That's a big one. I got 3. Trust me, it's not easy, but that for sure is helping you. But still, even so,
It's that. It's also, balancing relationships, balancing family. It is a lot, and trying to find that happy balance, it can be challenging sometimes.
Okay.
But so what I figure that works for me is, as much as I enjoy doing this, each episode takes me probably about 10 hours total. When you factor
you guys
in,
hear that? 10 hours for an episode.
when you factor in the recording, the setting up, the editing, the making the reels, the thumbnail,
scheduling,
the schedule, all that too, it's about 10 hours per episode.
Canceling or moving or whatever.
That happens. You get everything set up, and then somebody calls right away and says, "Hey, I can't make it anymore." Or I have one guest. I won't say their name. They confirmed, and then I have everything set up. They don't show up, and I ask them where they're at, and they say, "Oh, are you in Seattle or are you in San Francisco?"
Oh my gosh.
They were in Los Angeles at the time, and for them, they totally dropped the ball. So, needless to say, I haven't called them back for the show. That is a lot to deal with, and then in order for me to give each episode its due credit, it's about 10 hours, which means I can only do about 2 per month. So 2 episodes per month is 20 hours of my own time.
Wow.
On top of
Your
my
job.
work schedule, and on
And
top
your
of relationships,
girlfriend or-
exactly,
yeah.
for my wife. So
Your wife,
it's
excuse me.
it's a lot. So the way that I see it is, if I'm never going to have children, and that's by choice, we just decided that that's not the thing that we want to do. We can get into economics in the Bay Area and a whole bunch of other stuff. But but for us,
you and I could have a real political discussion that I don't think is the time for this podcast, but like the Bay Area is such a different, unique climate of everything that goes on melted into this soup of just trouble and wealth and you name it.
It's a lot.
And having to have 2 jobs. It's almost like you're forced. You're not the only person, and I'm sure I'm not the only person that's doing 2-3 different things just to try to get a level higher, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of us out there, especially in the Bay Area. You go to other states and they're just relaxing. They're enjoying their life more.
It's different.
We are here working to live.
But going back
or
to
living to work. I don't know which one.
Going back to what I was saying is that in lieu of having children, I think we all need to find that one thing that we can give back to help others. And for some people, and I give them due credit because I know a lot of great parents out there, that is raising their kids to be the next productive members of society. And they will put all their time and effort, which is great because we need great parents out there. For me, in lieu of doing that, how can I give the same type of energy back to people who are already here who need that? And that's sort of the way I think about it. So in lieu of having my own
that's your
kids,
inspiration.
Exactly. And
so it's not the kids that you would pass it down until you have the kids, maybe, and they could take over.
It's more for how can I help out everybody else who's trying to find these answers and trying to make their lives better. Because if I can help to give them the information to make their lives better, if they decide to have kids or currently have kids, that gives them more information to make those kids better, and the cycle repeats itself.
Let me ask you, I mentioned earlier in the podcast that the reason I started it is because I was looking for answers as well at an age. And I was like, YouTube was one big motivator, Instagram. What did you look for when you were growing up as a motivation? Like nowadays, if you want a mentor, and you could literally find the mentor and beg him on Instagram or whatever to be your mentor. I'm not saying he'll do it. But how did you get motivated, or how did you understand the process when you were younger? And did that influence your podcast?
Sort of. If I go back till maybe 18 to 20 years old, that really tough time for a lot of guys that age, you really needed an older brother figure. And I didn't have an older blood brother, but I did have an older cousin. He's about 18 years older than me. So at 18, he's 36.
Okay. So he's been through stuff.
He has a great job, made a lot of money. Definitely very charismatic. You look at someone like that at 18 and you're saying, whatever he's doing, I want to do that because at least from what I can tell, he's getting the results that I think I want. He takes care of himself. He's getting attention from the women. He makes a lot of money. He's traveling. He just bought like a couple of houses. And this is before 07 when everything just tanked. Yeah. And he got caught up in that. Time. It was a tough time. But like, okay, what is he doing that I need to do? And it forced me to, and this also happened with several other people that I met during that same time frame, is what are they doing that I'm not? I think I know what the correct answer is because it looks like it is if you read the books, but it's not working. So I had to really humble myself and say, I'm going to forget everything that I think I know is right. What are these guys doing that I'm not? And I really started to learn how to people watch. I learned how to read body language. I learned how to, although some people say I'm a horrible communicator, I learned to pick up on.
You have a podcast that someone says that.
That's
funny.
It's hard to believe that.
That's kind of funny, right? It's just like.
But I started picking up on.
Who are those people? Where are they?
I started picking up on what people say and what they really mean. I started to figure out, okay, what are the successful people doing that I'm not doing? Where did they start out from? And I really got focused from probably the age of 20 till about 26 or so to say, this is that time in my life where I need to just focus on getting all these things right. I can't get caught up as easy as it is with, dating too many women, trying to buy that expensive car because I'm trying to keep up with the Joneses, which for us was, we had MySpace at that time.
Yeah, I remember MySpace.
It was just trying to keep up with the people that were putting all these cool pictures up. You really had to take a step back from that and say, there's a lot of work that I have to do and it's going to take me a long time. And I just got to take one step at a time. So thankfully, I didn't get caught up in anything that was, for me, a major
blow.
Yeah, financial. I didn't buy a house at 19 thinking that I'm supposed to do it and then get caught up in a mortgage that I can't afford. I didn't buy an expensive car. I drove a 1997
Stayed
Honda
out of
Accord from
trouble.
Honda. I stayed out of trouble.
Which is a big one for kids growing up in the city.
It is a big one.
Yeah, it's
And
not a joke.
it is. It's not a joke at all.
Yeah.
But seeing that sort of motivated me to continue to do better for myself. And then when you cross that threshold into the late 20s and early 30s, things start to fall into place more. You start getting opportunities that you never would have thought you would have had you maybe had kids at 21, 22 years old, because that's what everybody in the neighborhood was doing.
Yeah.
Your circle of friends changes. That's a huge one.
That's a big one, right? For our guys our age, a lot of people don't realize that. And, like my young brother-in-law, he talks about it sometimes like, oh, my friend hasn't hit me up. And I'm like, dude, the friends you have today may not be the friends you have tomorrow. There's a lot of changes that come into a person's life. It's kind of interesting.
And I get it. You have that close group of high school friends. You guys think, we're all going to do everything together.
Forever.
Exactly. We're all going to have kids at the same time. Their kids are going to play together. We're all going to go to the same baseball game like we used to. And then you get older, and some people still can do that. Great. But some people, it holds them back. They just, this is my comfort zone. This worked in high school, so I'm going to keep on doing it. And then they never get out of it. So when you get to 30, but you're still hanging around with the same high school people and nobody's really taking that next step in their evolution, you're sort of there for comfort. At least that's been my experience.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I think if you don't meet new people, unless the people that you're hanging out with all have ballooned or blown up so much, they're having businesses, they're having nice things that you may want, or they're doing great, fitness, or they're in shape and you want to be in shape. Unless all of them level up and you'll level up with them. But if they're stagnant and you're trying to level up and you're maintaining this group of friends, you're not gonna. Yeah. It's very hard to do that. And then you'll see jealousy come out of it.
Oh, yeah.
Because if you start outgrowing someone, and maybe even some of your friends starting this podcast or whatever, maybe they're always trying to, blow out your fire, so to speak, where they're like, why do you do it, Mike? Why, et cetera. But yeah, I've noticed that too. You have to cycle your friends. And I think you have to do it a few times in life.
You have different, for me, it's at different points. You had your high school group, then you had the college group, and then there was a couple of people you still keep in touch with there who are trying to make good things of their lives. Then you get into the, I'd say, late 20s group. And then you get, after about 30, for me, about 30, 35, it's sort of been, all right, we kind of know where we're going in life. We can help each other out with business, with finances, because we're all thinking the same way now. Versus maybe some of my old high school friends are still in the mindset of, I have that same mechanic job that I've had since 20 years old, which is not bad. We need people out there to do that.
But it's not where you want to be.
Exactly. And I'm like, dude, if you have a happy life, and most of these guys who still are in that mindset, it's, I just want a family and I want to be able to provide for my family. And if this job does,
I don't want to deal with shit. There's nothing wrong with that.
That's their happy place. I'm like, they're doing great things for their family. Who am I or anybody else to judge them on how many zeros are in your paycheck or what that latest car is? Like, no, you have a happy life. You have a great family. You guys support each other. That's the most important thing. What else can I do to help give you more information to help improve what you have and what you want to do great in?
And that's what you're doing on Real Talks on the Rocks. I've always said, I've always treated everybody equally. To me, it's not about the money you make or whatever. I've met people shitty on both sides. I tend to not respect lazier people, no matter who they are, over anybody. Like wealth, money, none of that really matters to me. But what I look for in a person, when I really, truly, that earns my respect, of course, they have to show respect back, is the hustle, the dog in them, so to speak, in a man, the drive. I love that. I love to see that in anybody. I think that goes so much further. And hopefully we both connect people like that want to do more. There's nothing wrong with sitting back and enjoying life. I think there's a time and a place for that. I think we all at one point want to sit in the field somewhere and watch the greenery or watch the game and not worry about 20 things. But I feel like when you're young, and you don't have kids, and I don't know if you would understand this point that I'm trying to make as much, but as having kids, I feel like it's my duty at this point in time to do more so that I create something for my children. Because in 20 years, when we're 60 or whatever, I don't know if I'll have that same dog or that hunger And if I don't do something about it now, who knows the trajectory that they take? We want to give them opportunities. And I think once you have kids, you start understanding that. Another thing is you don't have kids yet, and hopefully you will one day, and God bless you. But I feel like kids, and this goes to the audience, level you up. So like a lot of people talk about the friendships leveling you up, or they'll take you to that next level, or keep you or drown you, right? Like if your friends are gang members, you might get caught in something. But with kids, you start thinking like, what school district are they going to go to? How can I afford to pay it? I got to get them into that soccer league. That soccer league's expensive. So you start doing more and more, and they want an iPhone, and they want these shoes and this and that. And you start trying to figure out ways to get them to that trajectory or to that level. And it levels you up. You start thinking of a house in a better neighborhood. Before my wife, Veronica, and I had kids, we were living in a small apartment, 1 bedroom, right? Mm-hmm. We weren't even thinking move out. Like we were there comfortably, and we got complacent. As soon as the kids came, I'm like, holy crap, I need a house. Like there's not enough room here. There's not, you know what I mean? So it just forcibly, in my opinion, children will make you push you out the door, so to speak. You know what I mean? To do more. Let's get back to you though. Thank you for letting me share that. We talked about editing and inviting guests. Do you edit your own podcast, or have you finally found someone to edit it, or do you like to do your fine touch on a podcast? Because that's guys won't know this, but that's such a time-consuming process.
Everything you see on the show is all me,
wow.
With the exception that I do have a photographer that does come in periodically, and she helps me with the Instagram photos. But short of that, all the editing, the reels, the thumbnail, that's all me.
Incredible.
And it is a lot of guessing and checking. The really big creators out there have a team. They start testing different types of thumbnails and titles. And I choose not to want to drop the money into that because it's just not worth it to me. To me, it's all about building an organic audience. I know for a fact that my podcast is not going to be the Joe Rogan Experience level 2 anytime soon, because I don't have that level of clout or personality that people say. I want to hear what he has to say regardless of who he's talking to. For me, it's about building an audience. So when I started this, and we had talked about it on my show, it's a long-term thing. What's my game plan 5 years, 10 years from now?
We did talk about that. I remember that.
It's because the best things for business, whatever, is can you commit to the long-term investment, knowing that in the beginning, you're not making any money, or if it's business, you may be losing money. You may have a lot of capital invested, and you see those numbers where you're negative so much every month.
Yep.
But it takes a while to build your clientele, to build trust, to build a theme of what you want to do. So I knew that already, and I knew that all these hours that I'm putting in to make each episode what it is not going to show in the bank account for a while, if ever. But I had to be comfortable with myself that
you had to accept that.
I have to accept it, and that's the reassurance for me, is that if it was about the money, I would have stopped a long time ago. I would have stopped before I called you on, because it's not about making money. It's about getting the message out there for people who need the information. They want the information, but they don't know where to turn to. So by me bringing on everyday people, not big names just for the clout, because they could come on my show, I have to pay them money, and their followers may watch.
I had a guy ask me that recently. Hey, do you pay? I said, pay for what? I was like, what are you talking about, bro? You want to come on or not? Like, I'm not going to pay you to talk. Are you like, don't do it.
Because if I pay you,
I don't make money off this.
If I pay you to come on my show, thinking that I'm going to get, let's say you have 1 million followers.
It's not even authentic.
No, they might listen to your episode, but what makes me think they're going to listen to all the other episodes?
Yeah, I would never do it. I don't give a fuck if they, I never cursed in the podcast. I don't even care if they have 10 million followers. I wouldn't pay, or 100 million. I just wouldn't pay. I think it's not authentic.
It's not. Well, there are times where it may work, so I'm not going to second guess the big guys.
It will work for getting attention. Absolutely. Even if 1-2% of the population sees it, of their following. However, it's not, I think, the message you were going for, and it's not the message that I personally, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. Don't get me wrong. I think it's a dumb marketing move to not pay that person to come on. I'm sure Patrick Bet-David paid Kobe Bryant to possibly come on his show. I'm not sure.
He's got the money to do that.
He's got the money to do it, and it's worked. It blew him up, whatever. But,
well, here's the one thing I will say about what both me and you are doing. We're asking people to give an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours of their time to listen to this episode. That is a lot to ask of somebody.
Ask.
So if I'm going to get people to spend that much time listening to me, whether they're walking in and then they're listening to it on their headphones or they're actually watching it on YouTube, which actually is what supports our channels more is when you watch it on YouTube, I have to be able to know that I've given them that level of trust, that they know when they turn on that episode that I don't know who Mike is talking to today, but I know it's going to be about finances, or I know it's going to be about something that's going to be relatable to me.
It's going to be valuable.
Exactly. He's built that trust with me, so I'm going to listen and invest my time into that. I'm not going to get that if I pay somebody who's got 1 million followers to come on my show, because it's only going to be his or her followers that will listen to just that episode because they don't know me, they don't know my theme. And that's my thought process on why this is going to take a long time.
I don't know. It just doesn't feel authentic to me. I don't make money off this. And I know you haven't probably made money off your podcast, but I do it. And you met my wife earlier before the episode, and she mentioned I do it because I've been in business on my own for so long, and finding individuals to talk to is intriguing. I find it intriguing. I find it therapeutic. And that's why we're really doing this, to give back. And you've told me that before. And you mentioned you've done over 50 podcasts now. When we talked about the long-term plan, you're like, hey, Simon, you have to make it to 30 podcasts. Do you remember telling me that?
It was about 22 podcast episodes. The top 1% of podcasts make it past episode 23. Everybody else, I think 97% stop after episode 3. And I've talked to people who have created their own podcast, usually audio. And so what happened to it? They're like, yeah, about episode 3, we didn't like it anymore, or I couldn't get so-and-so to come on. There'd be these reasons why they stopped doing it. Or probably the bigger one, they realized it's a lot of work. If I just did audio only, it's so much easier. You just clip the first and the end, and then you put it on whatever, Apple Podcast. But when you add the video in, that's
a whole other dimension. The faces, the lighting, the setups.
And I like to see the podcast because I like to see the emotions in people's faces and see what environment that they're in.
Let me ask you a funny one. It's happened to me before editing my own podcast, not podcast, but my own videos on YouTube. I have over 300 videos. That's how you found me. Had you ever had like a error while doing it, or something just erased, or something bad?
All the time.
Dude, isn't that the worst?
I mean, I tell people, hey, if you got to, it's just potentially a 2-hour long episode. If you got to get up and use the restroom, go do it. I can easily cut that part out. My challenge for me personally is that I tend to talk way too fast. So if you were my guest again and you bring up topic A, and automatically I take A and I want to go A1, A2, A3, now I'm trying to regurgitate everything in about a 10-second spiel. And then I end up talking too fast and I stuttered too much. So I have to go back and start cutting that out so it's more fluid. So that's what takes a lot of the editing out there. And I've had some guests that, they want to really think about the answers. They say, okay, give me a second. We're going to process that. They take their time and they give me a great answer. And I just cut out that dead zone. So if you hear it, you hear me asking a question and then it goes right to their answer. It gives them their most authentic, genuine self, and it helps make them look good, and it helps keep the listeners intact. Because if there was that long pause, people, where's this going?
Yeah. Someone, with nowadays, everyone wants something like to flash in front of their eyes every 6 seconds, like a goldfish or something. They have a short-term memory. I completely agree, and personally, I think the right answer is always comes off authentic, right on the spot, kind of like we're doing it. Although there are questions on the table, I haven't gone through all of them because we kind of know each other and it's been fun. I want to ask you, if you're going to give advice to someone, you mentioned you had friends that have done podcasts, they've dropped off. Let's say someone's out there, it's like, hey man, I have a story to tell, or I want to also influence people, or in a positive way. They're thinking about starting a podcast. What advice would you give them, and what should they expect?
Man, expect a lot of no views in the beginning because nobody knows you. Everybody has a story, and the story is great. But if you want to think about long-term sustainability for a podcast, your story is only going to be maybe a couple episodes. After that, what else you got? Mm-hmm. And for these more successful podcast / YouTube channels, it really comes down to what value do you provide for your audience? What audience do you want? What value can you bring? And how can you sustain that long term? Some people have real estate channels. They're all about how to invest in real estate, how much money to put down, where to buy it, all that stuff. That's something that is passionate to them, but they really have to ask themselves, can I keep doing this for 5 or 10 years? And some people can. Some people are very niche and they just talk about, fitness. And it's just, how do you get the biggest muscles? That can be great, but can you do that long term?
So I love the fitness part, but I want to add to that because as someone that's been on YouTube for 3 years, I have a bone to pick with YouTube and the way their algorithm is. And I have over 25,000 followers, which is actually really hard to achieve on YouTube. And those are real followers. I never bought them. A lot of people do this stuff and they have 1 million and I'm like, what the hell? But they don't get the likes. What I want to say to that is one thing that's weird about YouTube is the algorithm doesn't know the person, right? They really don't. They see clicks and it's all AI. But during the time, I did a YouTube video that said I invested $75,000 in Dogecoin. That video spiraled and I almost made almost $1 million on that investment. I didn't sell it like an idiot. But what I noticed from that point is who are the other competing people that were posting videos about Dogecoin? And you mentioned that they're talking about real estate, but it may kind of die out or fizzle out as a topic, not to YouTube. This one person on there was talking about Dogecoin every single day in the video. Dogecoin is up, Dogecoin is down, Dogecoin is up, Dogecoin is down. And because he kept on one topic, the same type of message, YouTube would push that video out, and for whatever reason, people would watch it, even though there's no real fluctuation or nothing major happened within Dogecoin for 24 hours. That's like so monumental, right? So the bone I have to pick with YouTube is you could be on YouTube, and to be successful, we could talk about wallpaper. As long as I talk about wallpaper every day, for some reason, the algorithm picks that up. But as soon as on YouTube, you talk about a completely different topic, aside from wallpaper, aside from real estate or Dogecoin, that video gets no attention. They dump it and bury it under. It's really weird. So I've had videos that I would do that are like, would skyrocket. And then if I just deviated from what I guess I'm known for on there, which is that one topic, it would be flat. And I'd be like, damn, I spent 10 hours editing this thing. I've recorded it. I thought it was going to be a hit. And all of a sudden I should have done it, So it just feels like a big waste of time.
Well, with that goes back to the whole building your audience organically, because YouTube is trying to figure out who is your audience. Okay, this is your audience. Yeah. If I being YouTube, can find out more of those people, I'm going to push it out to them. Yeah. But if you have your organic followers that are always watching, now you're increasing your watch time.
Like if they like you, they're going to watch you talk anyway, is what you're saying.
Exactly. And when they comment more, it tells the algorithm, okay, people are enjoying this. I'm not quite sure who his audience is, but this was about finances. Let me put it out into the finance algorithm and see what traction it gets. And it's like compound interest. At first, you start it, you don't see nothing for years. All of a sudden, you get a little bit of a bump, and then it just shoots up. That's sort of how the algorithm works. But for me, because I don't talk about topics that are like hot button, I don't, today is October, 20th? Yep. The big thing is the Israel-Palestine thing. If I made a bunch of videos about that,
you'd probably have a lot.
Exactly. Yeah.
But then that's not who
audience?
I am. Yeah. There's plenty of people talking about it. Let's get back to that. You also said, if you're going to start a podcast, you said, don't expect a lot of views. What else can you say or add to that? Like, expect to put in a lot of time, expect to juggle more than you know. Like, give us a little bit more of the oomph of what it is like having a podcast, because I could tell you what I think, but I'd rather you've done more episodes than me.
You really had to be passionate about what you do. You have to, if you've ever read Simon Sinek's book, you have to know your why. Because if you don't understand why you're doing it, how is anybody else going to understand that? Yeah. And that's going to push you through all those dog days where maybe you're backed up on episodes. Maybe the computer crashes and you got to redo everything.
That's what we talked. I've had that.
Yeah. Or maybe one of the cameras wasn't recording and you thought it was, and it screws everything up.
That's why there's 3 microphones.
Yeah. So you have to know what it is why you're doing this to begin with, because that's going to push you through all the dog days. And then you forget about the idea of, is this going to give me 1 million views or not? And it becomes about, I'm delivering a product that I know my audience is going to enjoy.
And you're proud of.
Exactly. Now, they may not enjoy every episode, or maybe some people are, I just want more fitness. I don't really care about the money. I'm good with that. That's fine. Or maybe they want more money and they want less about the mental health thing because that's just their thing. Hey, great. I don't expect everybody to listen to every episode, but if I can give you all the information, at least I know you're probably going to come back and at least listen to the beginning part to say, am I feeling this or not?
Yeah, check it out, kind of dabble into it. You mentioned fitness. you mentioned a lot of people come on your podcast to talk about fitness. I've seen quite a few. I think there was a guy I met at a random event, Corey. I think he was an NFL player. I think he was on your podcast.
Corey was, yes.
Yeah. He's a nice guy. He was dressed as like
the whole Zeus picture thing.
Zeus picture. Yeah.
Did you mention that you were on the same show?
You know what? I don't think I knew at the time he was on your show because I just met him in person.
Gotcha.
And then, but he was a very nice guy. I did meet his other friend who also works at Barry's. They're all nice. It was just a great event, but I didn't know.
People.
I didn't know, which is a small world.
Yeah.
But let's talk about that. Do these podcasts de-stress you or do they bring more stress onto you? Like, do you feel relieved after you do an episode, or is it like, oh man, I got more work to do now, and now I'm more stressed out?
It's stress, but it's a good stress.
Okay.
It's a stress because it gives me sort of that purpose. Okay, this is my project. This is what I'm building.
Yeah.
This is what it's going to take for me to do it. Now, if I gave myself unrealistic timeframes, let's say this was my episode and I wanted to put it out tomorrow. Well, now I'm putting myself under too much undue stress where it becomes unenjoyable and I'm not delivering the product that I want to deliver to my audience.
Yeah.
And this is where I came up with the idea of I can only do 2 podcasts per month.
Yeah.
And even that can be a stretch depending on what the needs are of my full-time job.
Sure.
And that takes priority because obviously that pays the bills.
Yep.
And I want to make sure I do the best job I can in that role. And then on my time off, focus on this. There have been times where I've been backed up and I have my own schedule. I want to release an episode every 2 weeks or every other Monday. And sometimes it comes down to the Sunday before.
Wow.
And I just got to crunch down and get it out there and then maybe work on the reels another day or whatever it is. And even with that, it used to be you'd had to make a lot of reels.
Yeah.
Since that has gone down, I've also lowered the amount of reels that I need to make, which actually saves me more time. So you still have to kind of play with what you need.
You're not chopping as many.
Correct.
That's cool. All right, let's talk about something fun, and some of your guests may appreciate this question. Who are your favorite guests on your show, or who is your favorite guest? You don't have to mention me. Let's say I'm excluded. Don't bring me up at all in this.
Simon was the worst guest.
Thank you. You know what? I'll double on that. I was the worst guest. I probably took the longest to get to the point. But who's one of your favorite guests and why? Why did that experience make it memorable?
Everybody has been a great guest for me.
Okay.
I can't pick out one specific one.
Who do you remember? Like if you go, man, I really enjoyed that episode.
Well, I will give credit to the first one to take the plunge with me. His name is Johnson Soforn. He was episode 1.
Okay.
When I had no idea what I'm doing, and he's got the courage to come out, and we're good friends already anyway. But he had the courage to come on, sit down in this chair. I didn't know, okay, is the lighting okay? Are the cameras off? I'm wearing an Under Armour hat and like a t-shirt. I'm like, okay,
funny.
this is I tried to set it up in a bigger room and everything was just off and I didn't have a list of questions. Everything was just sort of, I just got to do it, put it out there and we'll figure it out.
And he was patient.
He was patient.
Yeah.
We got into his story. And by the way, he's episode 1. He had a great story about, he had brain cancer and at the same time that his firstborn was coming along.
Oh, wow.
So his wife's pregnant. He's dealing with this. So he talked a lot about how he was able to get through it, what the focus is about. It's for the kids. I got to do what I got to do. So imagine being that person trying to stay strong for your wife who's 8 months pregnant.
Yeah.
And you're like, hey.
Not stressing her
exactly.
out
I got this thing in my brain that if I don't take out now, then I'm dead. It was a lot.
That is a lot.
And I told him this. I said, you're always going to be the first guest. You're going to be the one that helped you start this thing. And of course, I didn't know at the time how long I would keep doing it, but that was a couple of years ago. I'm still doing it. Yeah. So he always has that one place where, okay, this is what got me going.
I love that story. Thank you for that. The first experience seems to always be one of the most memorable for anything we do, right? Mm-hmm. But that's a great story, and I'm glad he's okay now, right?
Oh, yeah. He's, he did lose his hearing in 1 year, but it's a small price to pay for having everything.
Very small price to pay because I lost hearing in 1 ear just driving and Veronica yelling in the other ear. Man. So he's fine. I'm glad he's doing well. Another fun question. Do you ever get noticed? Or does anyone ever go, hey, you're Mike from that podcast? Or has that not
It's
happened
a couple of times.
It's
surreal because I don't think of myself as a celebrity by nothing like that. So when a random person says, hey, don't you have that? Like, yeah, I hope you're enjoying it. You don't know what to say.
Like, hey,
Am I supposed to sign an autograph? What do I do? That's the other side that I didn't think about too much was, okay, what if people start noticing you more? I figured out when I get there.
Yeah.
Should it become an issue? I'll have to cross that bridge when I get there.
We're men. We're not David Beckham and Michael Jordan. I don't think you'll ever get to that level. Like for Joe Rogan, I could imagine he probably has to travel with security and this and that. It's kind of annoying. And I never want to get to that level. I don't know if you do.
I have no desire to be on the front page of some podcast magazine. Because then it defeats the purpose of why I'm doing it. If I'm doing it for the fan, there's a lot of other things I could do to get famous, like Mr. Beast, do a bunch of stunts, and hey, people will love you.
I always said it. I'd rather be the lawyer of the billionaires or be the 200th richest person than be the 10th richest person. You know what I mean? Like you could still afford all the fun stuff. You just don't have to deal with any of the drama that comes with it in the limelight. All right. Thanks for sharing that part. Let's talk a little bit about your day job. Obviously, we won't go into anything crazy and so forth, but why did you become a police officer? What was you told me why you started a podcast? Very honorable. What about why did you want to be in law enforcement?
Well, we can go back to when we were kids and, we'd all Halloween costumes. Of course, I was always the police officer, never the fireman. And so as a young kid, you think, I want to be a police officer one day. Then you get older and you start thinking about careers and you sort of forget that. This whole thing for me started probably around 9/11. So I was in college at Chabot College, junior college, first year. I still remember where I was at when the towers came down.
That was a crazy day.
Crazy. And it became, what am I going to do? This is a big event. People forget about, if you aren't from that same generation, that wave of
some
patriotism.
people don't even know it happened. The younger
it's
kids.
Crazy at how you meet people now that weren't even born. Like, oh, wow, I'm getting old.
Yeah.
But the level of patriotism that came to our country for that event, exactly. We all just bonded together. All the little things that we fought about didn't matter anymore. It was about, we just got attacked. We need to go out there and do something about it. So for me it was either join them. Like I was almost getting ready to sign up for the military. Like, we just got to go because something happened. We got to take care of it. And I ended up not doing it because I'm saying, I'm in college now. What's going to be the best thing that I can do that is going to benefit maybe safety and security?
Yeah.
So this is when they just created the Department of Homeland Security. They reorganized everything. INS went away. The FBI was so focused on organized crime and the Soviet Union, and now they're like, we got to change everything up.
Went to terrorism.
Exactly. So it became, okay, well, could I do anything federally? At the time, I'm thinking local law enforcement. It's great, but I want to do something more.
Yeah.
I went through that whole process, realized I was—
On the federal level?
On the federal level. Okay. And I realized I was way too young to be jumping into this.
I see.
It's like real life hits you like this is—
Do the federal law enforcement typically like to see some local law enforcement before you make the jump, or?
It's more about your life experience. What have you done? And that's what has been the biggest thing that I've seen in today's day and age is if you don't have that life experience, and people say, what does that mean? It just means, how do you learn how to talk to people? What stresses and trauma have you gone through in your life that you powered through? They're going to help you when you get into those dog days at work or something. If you haven't gone through much, if any, all of a sudden you're thrown into a real life, terrorism type of thing that you got to address. It's like, whoa, I have way over my head. And I got that vibe when I was talking to a bunch of senior agents. Like, okay, this isn't for me now. I really need to go out there and figure out how this whole thing called life works. So I went through various careers. I did a lot of loss prevention, retail, like kind of corporate security on that side. But then I reached a point where, okay, this is fine now, but there's no real path forward for me in this industry, which is great because I got out way before the retail apocalypse happened. So good for me.
Well, now the retail apocalypse is downtown, San Francisco.
It's nuts how that. I can't believe that happened downtown.
But go ahead, sorry.
So then that's when I started saying, well, this, I still want to help people in that sort of way. I've gotten some good training here on investigations and networking and whatnot. And then I was working with somebody who actually was a full-time SFPD officer, and he was working with us part-time. SFPD, San Francisco.
Oh, SFPD.
So he started telling me, you ever thought about doing law enforcement? And I said, yeah, when I was a kid, like local law enforcement. And then he started telling me about what the job is and how what I'm doing now is more relatable to it. So of course my feelers go up, and I'm like, well, you know what? Actually, I don't know why I didn't think about this sooner, because it gives you the ability to help out a community, whether it's you're a county sheriff, federal, or you're local.
Yep.
And because people call the police when something's wrong or they have no idea how to handle it, that's the first person that they call.
Absolutely.
So to be able to say, I could help them solve their problems or prevent somebody from getting injured, that was my main motivation for saying, okay, this is a great time for me to get into that industry. And it was a tough time because this is right after 2008. And
which is a big crash.
The big crash, the financial crisis, which means people are losing money, people are being wiped out financially, and cities that were invested in these huge funds for their pensions that now all went away. They were like, whoa, we screwed up on this one, or somebody else screwed up for us. So now we have to cut back or just not hire police officers and city service agencies until they can figure this whole thing out. So it was hard to get hired for me. It took me a couple of years before I finally got on.
I trained with a lot of police officers in jiu-jitsu. Obviously, a lot of you guys need that. And I'll say it here. I don't care what you think of the channel. Some people hate law enforcement. Some love it. I personally love it. I think there should be more of you guys. Growing up as a kid, I was taught to think differently, running around the streets in San Francisco. But it's so important when something goes down, 911 is the number you call, whether or not you're living in the hood or you're living in a $10 million neighborhood. And you guys don't get enough credit. And what's happened in the last few years has made it even worse. It's disgusting to see how some of these officers are treated. It's sad. And I tell my kids all the time, always respect, but like, hey, you got to show respect to law enforcement. I think it's a big one. I think without law, none of this is possible, right? And what are some of the daily challenges you face? I mean, we know you're kind of like Batman, right? You're like getting suited up to go to your job at the time. And in your uniform, you're riding a motorcycle. I saw. We'll talk about that. But then you're taking off the cape, so to speak, and you're doing a podcast at night or in the day. But what are some of the challenges you're facing as a police officer today, particularly in the Bay Area? Now, you're not an SFPD where I think it's worse, but you're not, right?
No, I'm not an SF.
Yeah. So, but what are some of the challenges you face?
I mean, every agency has their own individual set of unique challenges. The challenges that I face in my jurisdiction are different than San Francisco. They're different than Oakland. They're different than San Jose, or even smaller cities. Everybody has their own unique set.
I see.
For me specifically, we're dealing with the staffing crisis. That's everywhere. So we're learning how to juggle more on each person's plate, which a lot of us tends to be we're just working more hours because there's nobody there. So that's one big challenge.
I've had an incident to talk about that. We had a break-in a while back when we were in remodeling, and they showed up and they're like, there's only 8 of us from this road all the way to there. It's taken 15 minutes for a response. I'm like, wow. So, staffing shortage is a serious thing in the police department right now, correct?
Yeah, it is like a huge thing because in some departments are really struggling with it. And it gets to a point where if you only have maybe 2 officers or 3 officers for a medium-sized city at any given time, maybe on night shift, they have to prioritize what's more important. A call of somebody getting injured right now, they have to go to it. So a call about a break-in that happened maybe a week ago, we can't get there right now. We have to take care of the priority calls first. And then as soon as we can get to you. And
like
then
a violence incident or something that's more important.
That's been because it comes to a level of customer service where you call us because your business just got broken into. You want someone to respond right away. Totally get it.
But it's tangible. It's like, hey, okay, so you got broken glass, but down the street, someone's beating their wife.
Exactly.
Which is like horrible.
That's where we have to go first. Right? Correct. And then if we get bogged down on those calls, that's more time than we're not responding to your vehicle break-in or your store break-in. Yeah. And then that's a challenge because you want to help out everybody give the same level of service, but sometimes when staffing is too low and the calls come in at the same time, you do have to prioritize. And it can be difficult explaining to people why our response takes so long. And most people are understanding. They realize, hey, my window got broken. They took minor property, but nobody got hurt. And I realized that. But
that's not the police's fault. It's really not. It's not like you're sitting there eating a donut, not coming to the scene of the crime. You know what I mean? You're dealing with something, and someone else is dealing with something, and so forth. And there's a limited amount of you guys for such a big area. Why do you think there's a staffing shortage? Do you think it's because of the funding, or is it people don't want to be a police officer anymore, given what they've seen with the defund the police movement, which is ridiculous?
That goes back years. And for this whole thing for me started especially for here, because our challenges in the Bay Area are different than maybe other parts of California. For example, Fresno doesn't have a staffing crisis. People there still want to be police officers.
Oh, really?
They have to turn people away.
I didn't know that. Okay, good.
But it's a different type of community that has a different view of law enforcement than maybe some people do in the Bay Area. That's not good or bad. It's just different. But what you're seeing is in Silicon Valley specifically, if you know as a 20-something-year-old that I can get a job at Google and make $250,000 a year and just sit on a computer all day, I get free food, I get free dry cleaning. Google, we just use
showers in a gym.
Exactly. Why would I want to put my life on the line?
Or lose my job or my life or go to jail trying to stop a criminal?
When I could make a lot more doing this, sitting in the comfort of a big building and not have to work.
Building.
Correct. Why would I do that? And then you start seeing the things on the news that influences young people saying, "Oh, I don't want to do that job. Look what they're doing on TV." Legislation gets passed that it's explained to people in one way. And if you're somebody who's thinking about the career, you're like, wow, that sounds like a tough thing. Why would I want to put myself through that? And then the advent of technology, I'm not blaming anybody for this. It's difficult to be a parent. I can only imagine, if you have a couple of kids and both people are working, but a byproduct of that can be if kids are getting raised on iPads and iPhones because the parents are so busy, they're, hey, take the iPad, play Angry Birds. Like, I have work to do because you need to make money for the family.
Sure.
Over time, if the child gets used to being on the screen, they're not developing the social skills that maybe you or I developed at the same age.
Yeah.
So when somebody comes into an interview and they can't even make eye contact with the people who are doing the interview, everything is down here. Well, now, even if you answer the questions correctly, if you come in for an interview.
You're not an in-person type.
How can we, we're seeing, okay, if you can't even make eye contact with us, what are you going to do when you have to go to that call of a domestic violence?
And analyze the body and the mind.
Because people we're all humans. We can read body language. The person that you have to go talk to is reading you. And if you have bad posture and you're looking down,
something.
It can be an officer safety hazard because they can say, this person, I just can't take him seriously for some reason.
It's not authoritative. It's also not... something's off. I mean, I feel it. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and authoritative, it doesn't mean being an a-hole. It just means that you can carry yourself well. So if I'm talking to you, okay, there's a respect there. Let me listen to what's going on.
Police officers, very similar to like a coach on a team, in my opinion. You know what I mean? If like, let's say a girls' soccer game, if the coach is like this and he's not going to understand what's going on, people are calling you to help resolve a big problem, right? They're solving a problem or they're calling 911, so to speak. So if you show up, you have to be presentable to do that. It's such a tough thing to be turned on all the time as well, because what people don't realize is also, and I think it's important to say on this podcast, is you guys are human. You go through stuff that everyone else goes through. You could have an argument with your girlfriend. You could have an argument with your wife. You could have a sick kid. You could, all these weird emotions that go into a daily routine, but yet you still have to suit up and care for someone else, almost like a nurse or an individual of that profession. It's so honorable, in my opinion, that you do that. A lot of people that are sitting at Google, we're ragging on Google today, but a lot of people are sitting on, behind a desk job anywhere, Google, Facebook, here, wherever, they may not have to interact with anybody that day. They could have a bad day and kind of go under the rug, so to speak. But as police, you got to go to the scene.
I'll give you one example. This happened several years ago. Those big steel transmission towers for PG&E? They're along the freeway, the big towers that carry the transmission lines. Somebody climbed up one, and he wasn't in the right state of mind. Yeah. So we get the call, we go out there, and I'm trying to talk to him, and he's not in his right state of mind. So
mentally challenged person.
That person, and then plus you're trying to talk at this great distance because he's way up there, and we think we're reaching a point where let's climb down slowly so we can get you the help that you need. For whatever reason, a switch flipped in his head, and he thought it'd be a good idea to walk on the wire. So as soon as he touched the wire, you can only imagine what that scene was. And then everything just fell down into a backyard. So I'm the first one to go over the fence, and I have no clue what I'm going to see.
Yeah.
And
because it's like, this is not 110. This is
it's
voltage beyond.
It's like a couple 100,000 volts or something like, it was something ridiculous.
Yeah.
But, you just know you have to go. You got to go to that scene. You don't know what you're going to see. You don't have time to say, okay, if I do this, if I see this, you just got to go. And I'm the first one to go over the fence, and he was still alive.
Well,
so I had to tell people he's still alive. He's missing some things, but he's alive. So we had to get over there. We had to call the airlift helicopter, get him in there, stabilize him, fire. They do their own, they do their whole thing. And then he gets in the helicopter, and then he's off to whatever hospital that they take him to. And right after that, it's okay, back in service. What's going on? Jesus. Oh, there's an auto burglary over here. I got to go take care of that. You have to
like mentally turn off what you just experienced, which is traumatic.
Those things like that are really, there's more gruesome ones that I won't get into here, but you get the idea of these things come out when they come out. They're not, it's not a normal occurrence, but when they do, you have to respond. And then you have to be able to go and handle the civil dispute between a landlord and a tenant, or an auto burglary that just happened. Yeah. Your business just got broken into.
Two people arguing about who's in line first at a McDonald's or whatever.
That happens. And then like, if you just had your place of business broken into, that's the most important thing to you. I understand that. Yeah. And then so when I show up here, especially after going through a call like that, I have to be able to turn off that first call and say, okay, Simon, this happened to you. Let me get the information. And then it's a lot for people who do this year after year after year. It builds upon you. And then sometimes sometimes you can't get the officer that goes to your call, and it's a lot to deal with. And, maybe the reaction isn't what you'd expect. And then that leads, because you don't know what he went through.
So you have experience where people are actually upset with you for whatever reason, or someone in the police force.
In general.
Because they feel like they're not getting a level of attention, or maybe your officer's a little late, or whatever it may be.
That's a natural human reaction. Yeah. Keep in mind, there's about 800,000 sworn law enforcement personnel in the whole country. So even if 99% of us were great, that's still 8,000 people where if they have one bad day, one time they see a call.
No one's perfect, man. People need to understand that. Like, there are bad lawyers, and I've met a lot of bad lawyers. There probably are bad policemen. There are bad Jews, bad Christians, bad everybody. You name it. It's impossible to have a great person in every profession, in everything, and people need to understand that. And then what you mentioned earlier is people go through stuff. What's interesting enough, what probably really relates to the podcast and your career in law enforcement is, in the podcast, you could also have a bad day. Like, I've had a bad day one day, and I had a podcast to do. Within 20 minutes, I got some bad news on something, and I was like, gotta turn it on. Like, nobody gives a shit on that end that you're having a bad day, right? You still got to turn it on.
You got to turn it on.
PTSD, is it like a serious thing? Do you ever take it home with you where you go, hey, and you've talked about mental health on your podcast a lot. Is it a serious thing where you take it home with you in terms of what you saw that day? Or what do you do to cope with what you saw, like that guy on the wire, and move on from that? Maybe someone out there is struggling with something that may want to.
That can be very difficult, because for me, the best way to deal with it is to go to the gym. And I think for a lot of guys, our therapy is something physical. We got to go to the gym. Some people don't understand that that works. To me, that does work.
I agree with that.
That works better for me than sitting in front of a therapist, telling them all my problems. He doesn't care. She doesn't care. That doesn't help me. I need to do something physical to go out there and get that. Exactly. And the podcast is a very similar thing. We had talked about this being a good stress reliever for you.
Sure.
When you get to talk to somebody else about what they bring to the table, you start to remember all the good things that you want to put out there in the world. And that takes the place of maybe some of the traumatic things that you've seen recently. And to me, that helps process it. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people that process trauma differently. Some people turn to the bottle. That has its own set of consequences. Yeah. Some people take it out on their family and friends. They isolate themselves, which is not what you want to do. For me, the best way to get through it is, it's funny how I just said talking to a therapist doesn't really mean anything because I'm not getting any value. But talking to you and getting value that you bring to the table, I learn something, and I get the audience to learn something as well. that's my way to process, along with making sure that I take care of myself in the gym. I'm probably in the gym way too much.
Good for you.
I'm not a bodybuilder. I don't
Yeah.
intend to be, but just having that time where you can zone out and do your thing.
So let's talk about that. Do you work out in the morning, at night, or are you kind of taking, say, that Joe Rogan step where he's like, I got to work out at least 3-4 times a week. It doesn't matter what time of day I do it.
Oh, I got to do 6, if not.
Wow.
If I can do 7, great. But you have to understand, especially on the work days, there's not a lot of time. So I may go into the gym 20 minutes when I get home and I'm just doing pull-ups and abs and that's it. Wow. I don't have time to be lifting heavy before I have to go to sleep in 2 hours and then go back to work. So the days where I'm not at work, that's when I spend my longer duration times in the gym. But in between work days, it's something simple and quick because while you may not get a lot of benefit after doing, let's say 100 sit-ups, the fact that you went into the gym and you did it, mentally it tells yourself, okay, I just completed what I needed to get done. I can check the box off. Because then you stop going thinking, okay, I don't have enough time. Things came up. I'll go tomorrow. I'll do a double day tomorrow. The more that builds up, now you start getting out of that routine and your body responds to that.
And little by little, it starts chipping away as you get older. And it's really hard to get back into it if you don't continue it. And I've had some older guests on the podcast and they're like, hey, fitness to me is number one. Health is number one. Like you mentioned all these crazy problems people discuss, and you probably witness them more than like what I read about and people read about. But health is number one. There's no reason, there are people that are really dealing with some crazy stuff. So take care of your body, take care of your health.
And with that, we'll just bring up one thing. People talk about the retirement issue. That is something that comes up on our podcast a lot because a lot of us grew up with that mindset that once we're done with our job, let's say 50, 55 years old, we're going to retire.
Yeah.
We don't really know what that means. If we think of retirement the way our parents did, it was you do 30 years at that job, you retire, you get the gold watch, the house is paid off, and now I'm going to enjoy my grandkids, but I'm only expected to live to about 75 years old. Yeah. So your pension wasn't really going to last that long anyway. Now we're at a point where the more of us that take care of ourselves, the more likely we're going to be able to work with no problem until we're 70 or 80 years old. Yeah. So for us, the retirement thing is a little bit different. Yes, we want to have money available to us so we're less stressed out, but I don't want to just retire and then put my feet up on the desk and drink margaritas all day. I get bored with that after about a day and a half. I still need to do something else. And when we talked about the long-term future of the podcast, I don't know what it's going to turn into in 10 or 15 years. I just know if I keep doing it, at some point, it's going to morph into something that's going to keep me going beyond that.
Give you passive income, give you something to look forward to. You'll probably have friends around that you could call or people.
Who knows who I'm going to meet, who sits in that chair across me that says, you know what? I need you to help me with this or do that. Who knows? You just got to keep doing it.
Estate planning, legal, whatever. No, I completely agree. And it sounds to me like actually from what I'm picking up from this podcast is being a police officer, you're doing it, you love helping the community you mentioned, but also the podcast is kind of like your escape and long-term, like at peace, at ease, where you could mentally escape from some of these horrific things you may see or some of these things that are like just not what an average person would process normally, which is kind of neat. Would you say that's accurate?
Pretty accurate. Yeah. And then we had mentioned the whole kid thing, and I support anybody who's great parents out there 100%. That's probably the best thing that we as human beings can do is to create the next generation and have them go out there and be productive members of society. From my point of view, it's while that may not be in the cards for me, that doesn't mean that I can't help those who do have young kids because we see a lot of people who don't have, a lot of kids who just don't have. The parents aren't in the picture. Yeah. No fault of their own for the kids. They were just stuck in a bad spot. And then if we don't, as a society, give them what they need, they're going to end up being unproductive members of society.
They need some direction, man. What's different between the kids nowadays and the kids as us growing up, we're very close in age, is we had some rule sets. Like you wouldn't go and smack an old lady. You know what I mean? Or push an old man down the street or for clout or to rob them. Like in my neighborhood, you would, and in Russia, you would get you get destroyed. I was going to say obliterated. But you would get destroyed doing that. And out here, I'm seeing some crazy things on Instagram and so forth. It's like as if there may not be a father figure because he's working, but the level of extreme stupidity, I would call it even, or extreme just like, acting out has like amplified since we were like back in the day, I grew up in the city, so if I was drinking in public, I was like, oh my God, oh no, you know what I mean? Now people are just snorting crack and shooting up and no one even says anything. It's kind of crazy. So like the level of what's allowed, what's acceptable by society has drastically changed. And it's changed so much in the Bay Area that it's scary. You know, it's very scary to me.
It's a new
especially
challenge.
for the kids. You mentioned the kids. Let's talk about what is your least favorite part about being a police officer, if you want to get into that. That's kind of a funny one.
That is a funny one.
Because the most part we already got, even though I didn't directly ask it. You mentioned helping the community, being there for someone, calming the situation. But what's the least favorite part?
I mean, like any job, you're going to have your good days, you're going to have your bad days. Anybody that thinks they're going to get, and this is one of the challenges I see with younger people coming in, is whatever they choose for a career, they think not only does this career have to last me 40 years, but it's got to pay me top dollar. I have to make my best friends here. Yep. They have to watch out for my needs. Every time I have a bad day, they have to be there to support me. We've gotten into this point where people think their job has to do all of that, and it was never designed to do that. You go to work, you pretty much have an agreement with your employer. You pay me this paycheck. Here's my list of tasks that I need to do. It's my job to go out there and do those tasks the best of my ability. Some days it may mean more tasks to do and you may not want to, but you got to deal with it. Sometimes it might be a little bit less and you can afford to invest more in the tasks that you do need to do. But I don't expect to meet my best friend at work. I don't expect my job to fulfill all my different needs. That's why I have the podcast. Kind of fill in a gap that I don't get from my job, but I don't expect it to give that to me. So there's definitely things that happen in the course of any job where sometimes you get into disagreements with some people and you got to work it out.
With your peers.
Correct. Sometimes information comes up from the top that is unclear or nobody understands why. It could be from the city, from the state, it could be from your local agency,
there's
whatever
so many
it is.
moving parts in it.
Correct. So there's always going to be miscommunication issues there, but there's nothing about my job that I say, you know what, this sucks. I don't want to be here. It's all BS. No, you have your good days.
You know
and your
why
bad
you're
days.
there.
Correct.
And
again, if I depended on that job to fulfill all my needs, I'm screwing my own self because that's something that was never intended to be.
Have you had any funny incident on patrol?
I mean, define funny.
Well, where you're like, I can't believe I saw this. Nothing horrific or anything, but just something random. Someone gave you a funny, excuse with something.
I probably, there's a lot of funny stories that I probably shouldn't say on the air.
Sure.
But there have definitely been instances where, wow, did that just happen?
You were caught off guard. Like, did I just see this person run backwards naked or something?
I've seen things like that. I can't think of specifics.
That's okay. We'll leave it at that. But
there are plenty of funny moments.
Okay. If you have a son, would you say, hey, I want you to be a police officer, or this is a good profession you should focus on, given what you've experienced? Or would you say, be what you want to be? What kind of father figure do you think you'd be? Would you want him to follow in your footsteps?
I wouldn't care about if he did or he didn't. It's more about giving you the tools to help decide what's best for you.
I love that.
There are some people who would love if their son followed in their exact footsteps. You take over the business from me. I love it. And if they want to, great. But I've also seen examples of the firstborn son having to follow in dad's footsteps and they never wanted that. But then they're in that weird position where dad's expecting me to take over the business, but I really don't want to. And they kind of do it anyway. For me, it would be giving you all the tools so you can make the best decision for your own life. If you want to do what I did for a living, by all means, have at it. But if you want to take something else that you've learned and create your own business, which is something that I guess you could say the podcast is a business, but in terms of more of a profitable business, then yeah, you by all means go and do it. Maybe I could learn something from you when you take that step to say, what else could I do differently?
That's awesome. All right. Well, thank you for sharing. I know a lot of people don't want to talk about being a police officer, some of these things. Thank you for sharing that. And again, for law enforcement, thank you guys for what you do and all the day in and day out. Let's talk a little bit about personal, because again, you interview a lot of people. You rarely get interviewed. This is your first one you mentioned. If you were to talk to your past self, you mentioned 18, 20 years old when you were young, you were thinking of doing things. What would you say? Let's say you got the time machine back to the future, so to speak, and you're able to just go back in the past, see Mike right there, what would you tell yourself?
I've thought about that. What would I tell my 18-year-old self?
Yeah.
And it would probably be the same advice that my older cousin gave me, which was no matter how good the advice is, I wasn't going to pay attention at 18. There's just no way I could have at that age processed what my older self would tell me. My older self could have came back at 18 and say, hey, I'm 45 years old now. Like, this is what you went through in your life. Do A, B, and C, and you'll be fine. And I would have just said, I'm
what are
sure.
you talking about?
Yeah, I can make my own decision now. It was different for you then. Do you remember what was important to me nowadays? I wouldn't have listened. So I would like to think I could go back in time and give myself advice on financial investments, but my 18-year-old self wouldn't have listened.
So would you just say, hey, just know you're going to get through it, or you're going to have challenges?
All the dark times that you've had, the breakups, the losing a job,
don't worry about it.
You didn't get into the college that you wanted to. You will get through it. It's going to sting in the meantime, and that's part of life, and that's part of what's going to give you the life experience to move beyond that, because you can go back and revert to, hey, this happened to me when I was 18, 19, and I got through it. So if I got through that, I can get through this.
So it sounds like your thought on it is, hey, anything detailed is going to probably fly over the head of your young self. But
that's part of the reason why I don't do a show aimed at 18, 19-year-olds. When you're that age, you think you're looking for a big brother figure, but I could give them all the advice in the world. They're not going to listen.
Yeah, you're thinking they're just going to want to play FIFA and
I don't blame them, because biologically,
the majority of them. I shouldn't say everybody, but the majority are probably thinking about girls or something.
That's the thing, is that at that age, your mind's not even fully developed until you're about 25 or 26. So what you think is right at that age is very limited to what your emotions are telling you right now. Like if you're trying to pick up on girls at 18 or 19. Exactly. So no matter what I would tell an 18-year-old, it's going to fly over their head.
Wow. I love that. Okay. Well, thank you. All right. That's a good one. Where do you see yourself years from now? Let's say 5 years to 10 years from now. Where would Mike want to be? Are you sitting in Sonoma on a field, going over all the cool guests you've had, or
on the weekends? In 5 years, continuing doing this podcast, we'll see. Where full-time jobs, everything. Promotions happen, things change. We'll see where that ends up going. But this podcast is something that I still see myself doing at least in 5 years. And really, the fact that I get to meet new and interesting people like you who have experience in things that I would have never thought about, to be able to pick your brain and to say, oh, this is something that I could take into my life. I never thought about it. He did it. How can I do that? That's where I see myself growing. And then in 10 years, who knows?
I love that. It seems like you're very passionate about what you do, and God bless you. And I do want you to keep doing it. I love your podcast as well. And I'll always have it in the memory as my first. And now you have it as the first, and hopefully it gets bigger. From all your guests, is there any memorable lessons that you've learned that you say, damn, that one hit a good note? You've had quite a few, and you could sum it up. But anything memorable that's, wow, that guy mentioned that one thing and that really stuck with me, or a couple of them.
Yeah. There's been several, and with 50 guests in the book, with the next one coming up in a couple of weeks, I've learned a lot from pretty much all my guests. I will say something specific. One of my guests, his name is John Lane. He was one of the finance guys on my show, and we were already fraternity brothers. We went to the same college together.
Oh, wow, okay.
So hearing him talk about the way that he's able to manage wealth and the way that he views money, it stuck with me, because he tried to give me this information probably when we were about 24, 25. We just graduated. He was getting into the industry, and he was trying to get a lot of us to say, hey, we got to think about investments and retirements and all that stuff.
And at that time, you weren't receiving it.
No, I was, and I talked about this on one of my last episodes with Miguel Delgado, I was embarrassed to tell him at the time that, because I knew everything he was telling me was right. On paper, this all makes sense. I was like, dude, I can't even afford my rent. I can barely afford food. I'm living off credit card right now because I'm trying to keep this lifestyle that I think I need to have for my age, because this is what you see in the movies. This is what the people you think are successful at your age, this is what they're doing. So I didn't really have the means to tell them, I don't have the money to do that.
You didn't want to maybe admit it
Yeah.
sounds like, hey, I'm really not,
Because he's telling me this, it all makes sense,
Yeah.
and I think I'm supposed to do it. But the fact that I can't
and
do
I'm
it,
not in a position, and I don't want to be. You didn't maybe at that age, you maybe didn't even want to disclose that or be frank with them that, hey,
yeah, it's a real
I'm in
thing.
a complete opposite wavelength right now.
Yeah, it's real talk, just like the name of the show.
Yeah.
It was a real hit home message for me. So when I had him come on the show and he spoke about everything, and we had talked about this, I think, off camera, that experience really, resonated with me, because it was a promise I made to myself back then that when I'm in a better position financially, that all those things he was talking to me about, that I'm going to do. I'm going to make sure that my retirement accounts are maxed out, that I'm doing this and doing that. Here's how I think about money. Here's how that helps me with my freedom. And I think that's what the key message was, is he related it back to your own individual freedom.
Yeah.
If you could have financial freedom, you could have pretty much anything you want in the world.
Opportunity.
And that doesn't mean that you're a multimillionaire or a billionaire. It could mean you're making a couple $100,000 in your financial savings and investment
and it
accounts.
Doesn't mean you're happy.
Correct. It's what do you want in your own life? And when you get older into your 30s and you stop worrying about the nice car and the fancy jewelry and the Rolex watches as much. I know you collect watches, but for me, it's
I do love them.
it's okay. Once I'm beyond that, what is it that makes me happy? And then for me, I get more humble. I drive the same '07 Honda Civic that I've been driving since 2010 when I bought it, and it still runs great. I don't have any payments on it. My motorcycle is from 2013. I don't have any payments on it. I focus on the experiences that allow me to enjoy my life, so I don't get stuck in a place where I have to keep keeping up with the Joneses.
Yeah, someone else came on my podcast. He's actually a husband of a housewife of a show on TV. And he told me, he's like, as I got older, I don't want to buy anything that I have monthly payments on. Mm-hmm. That was a big thing that hit me. He's like, I don't care. He's like, trust me, I could buy this and that and so forth. And he's a big real estate investor. And but he's like, I just don't want to have a monthly payment. He's like, because you know why? I could go buy a Rolex and I know my money, if it's a good Rolex, it's a good safe investment potentially. Or, you could buy a Shure microphone and see that you could probably sell it for what you close bought it for out there, depending on demand. Mm-hmm. He's like, but I paid for it and I don't need to keep paying for it every month. So 6 months from now, if God forbid something happens to my health or something happens, I don't have a Porsche that I still owe money for and a creditor keeps coming after. Yeah. That was such a big thing that hit home for me, because there's always, in America, we're supposed to leverage our loans and so forth. But I think if the audience is younger and as you get older, you tend to want less stress and less obligations financially, to pay every time. And you mentioned that earlier. When you were 25, you were worried about paying the credit card bill, paying your rent and so forth. And at that time you had energy to figure things out. When you get older, you don't want to be in that pickle.
It's tough. I know me and Miguel talked about this on episode 49. The people get upset about the 1% getting richer. Like, okay, all of this money, why don't you give it back to the poor people? And part of the reason why that doesn't happen is if you don't make enough money and you have to keep borrowing just to live the way that you think you're supposed to live, well, if you're borrowing money that you don't have, somebody has to give you that money. Yeah. So if I'm the bank or if I'm JP Morgan and I'm giving you the money to live off of, let's say in a credit card or a personal loan, you're paying me interest to give you that money, which means I own your debt. So me, as somebody who would invest, let's say in JP Morgan Chase, the more money that they give out to you so you can spend on commodities and things you don't really need, the more money they make, which means the more money I make because I'm investing in them.
It's a cycle, right?
It's a cycle.
The thing that really upsets me about, and we're getting ready to almost conclude this, but what before the American dream was to have a good job, to be happy, to live this lifestyle. Of course, stress comes in and there's lots of different things that have changed as we've gotten older and societal changes. But a lot of people, and this is kind of off topic, but a lot of people look down on people that are wealthy nowadays. I feel like there's like a negative stigma. There's, of course, the obnoxious rich people out there flaunting on Instagram and maybe faking it or not, I don't know. But I like the American dream to be wealthy, to build a building, to build a structure, to pass down something, to do some philanthropy work, to give back to the community. People that do that build things and companies, they employ a lot of people. They provide to the city, to the state. They keep families going and so forth. For some reason, and you add in politics, sadly, into that. People go, "Oh, that person's, he got rich. He must have done something," or this person's bad because of this, or they're greedy or whatever. I'm not saying they are or aren't, but for some reason, there's this like negative stigma for being rich. And I've seen it growing up with kids where if their dads were well off, they seem to have been a little bit upset by it or acting out from it. And to me, when I talk to kids that are well off or their parents are well off, I tell them, take advantage of it. Like, doesn't mean you need to be this bad kid that's obnoxious or disrespectful, but like, that's such a gift. Because, I didn't grow up with anything. And it's like, if I could be on step 6 of the ladder and understand things and have a mentor or maybe get a mentor or whatever, it just gives you opportunity. Like if your podcast blows up in the next 10 years and you have a daughter or son, et cetera, and they want to do something, that's a positive, right? Like there's something to say about a guy that's come from the ground up, but the person that started here and was able to get here and do great with it, I think that's just as humble and nice.
It can be. And it really depends on, it's just part of just our cycle. In order for the country to be as great as it is with the economy, the way that it is, people have to spend money.
Yep.
So we have to get you to continue to want to buy that brand new watch or that brand new Gucci hat or whatever it is. That desire to get you to want to buy those things keeps the consumerism going, which means people, and it causes people to spend more money, which drives the price up of things like homes around here, where now the average Joe can't afford a house in the Bay Area.
We could talk about that if you want to quickly touch on it. And again, we're getting off topic, but the Bay Area, the tech boom really made the Bay Area of 2000, and then another one, I believe it was around 2006 or something like this. But the tech boom with the Google going public, the Facebooks or Meta nowadays, that's what really outpriced a lot of Bay Area. But then you added in a second wave of international investment, especially in the Bay Area, where the Chinese and the Asian families coming in, and God bless them. I love them, hard workers, and in fact, impressive what they do in one generation. I've seen them move into neighborhoods where I was like, wow, this neighborhood's being predominantly dominated by an Asian culture. And it's because they work their ass off and they sleep together in one house. They buy another house and so forth. They know how to work together. They hire each other and so forth. They are a team. But with tech and the Asian investments and in foreign investments, not just from Asia, I think really priced out a lot of middle class working people. And what's interesting is I had someone come on the podcast that talked about real estate. Is a lot of people, we were talking about the retirement, and you mentioned someone that's investment. The house that you buy today that our parents or their parents before them bought for $35,000 is not possible, right? But that is no longer a retirement option anymore as well, because a lot of people are so priced out of buying their own home nowadays that they move back in with mom and pop. And when they move in with mom and pop, because they can't afford to pay their own rent and so forth, now ma and pa can't sell their home and do that Florida retirement or that other retirement or move a little more north. So it's becoming very interesting. And that's what actually was one reason one of these real estate people mentioned is a shortage of housing in the Bay Area as well, which is driving a supply-demand thing, where the supply is low, so the price remains high, even though the interest rate is so crazy, because people are living at home, less people are selling because they don't think they're going to get their money, et cetera.
Well, that's one thing, and people get upset about the foreign investment, but if you're somebody from China and you're making a lot of money there, your money's not safe there.
Yep.
You have to get it out and put it somewhere safe, and a great investment is putting it into American real estate.
Absolutely.
I don't blame anybody from overseas saying, I have this money. And
no, they should do it if you're overseas.
Put it somewhere safe. I mean, I get that part.
They should do it. And not only that, they get a visa.
then they get that too. That's the other side of it. And in episode 49, me and Miguel talked about demographics, and I showed him this whole demographic chart of the US and Europe and what that actually means for real estate. And you're right, in the Bay Area, the prices got jacked up because of the tech, and there's nowhere to build.
Yep.
So, my parents bought their house for what, $115,000, and in a neighborhood that wasn't the best neighborhood. Now it's probably worth $700,000 to $800,000. But then she's in a spot now, my mother, where if she sells it, okay, great. Where am I going to go? Am I staying here and I have to pay higher interest for a new place? Or do I move out of state to a place that I don't want to live, don't know anything about? It's almost like you're almost trapped in the same house that you're in. But let's say you do sell it. Okay, our generation here in the Bay Area has an interesting problem that I've seen, is that if you want to pony up the money to buy, let's say, a $1.5 million house, which is, I know it's shocking to people who live outside of California that houses cost that much.
Guys outside, that's like a barely 2,000 square foot rundown house that needs a remodel.
Correct. But let's say you want to buy the house because it's built in 1970, but I want the American dream. I want to buy the house. And if I buy it now and it goes up the same rate that house did from my parents' generation, by the time I want to sell it, it's going to be $5 million. But then we looked at the demographics and we saw how the baby boomers, like my parents' generation, where they were at, and we as millennials are their kids. And when you see the millennials, there was just a whole bunch of millennials out there. So if millennials start buying houses, we got to look at Generation Z, who would buy our houses. And then you looked at the numbers for Generation Z, completely reversed.
Wow.
There's not a big Generation Z out there. So if you're a millennial and you want to buy a house for $1.52 million, you may get shocked in 30 years because there's not going to be as many Generation Z people out there who would be even potential buyers.
Wow.
So your house may not appreciate the way that you think it would. And on top of that, what have we been doing since then? We've been building up. So there's a lot of condos out here that are going unused.
Absolutely. You know what? I own a condo downtown, can't rent it, can't sell it. I mentioned this on a couple podcasts.
You did,
now.
yeah.
And it's like, because of so many drug abuses near that area in Soma, it's horrible. I wish they finally clean it up, because they're expecting me to pay property tax still, right?
Yep.
But condos are, in my opinion, are just, if you're trying to build real estate wealth, are just not good investments in San Francisco. Maybe in Florida, and like if you're on the beach somewhere in Miami where it may sell, even though there's a lot of them. But out here, they're building so many, and you're getting diluted, and people rent the newest thing. Yeah. And there's a lot of investors, and they could lower the price.
There was one person I knew that they bought a 2-bedroom condo. It's a nice condo for about $1.6 million. Now, that's shocking that a condo would be that much.
That's insane.
But they bought it at the peak of the market, 15, 16. They wanted to move. They said, okay, in today's market, we know we're not going to get what we pay back for it, but we have a bottom number here. So if we get that, we are going to take a loss, a couple $100,000, and all the money we paid in HOA dues obviously goes away. So we're going to take a net loss. We know we just got to suck it up. They couldn't even get that.
Jesus.
So they were put in a position where they had to rent it out, and they didn't want to, because they just wanted to be done with it. We want to move away from SF. We got a different lives anywhere. But they're stuck in it because where the housing market is now, because there's so many luxury condos in the city.
A lot.
And
they're not all fulfilled.
They're not, because people don't work in the city anymore. Everybody's work from home, which is why commercial real estate is so ridiculously hot.
Death town out there. I got a video coming out on YouTube called The Death of San Francisco, which should drop. It's about a 30-minute video of me going over a couple of things I'm venting.
Yeah. I mean, I will say the city will adapt and change. I don't know what that will look like in 5 or 10 years, but they will find a way to adapt, whether it's zoning laws. And they say these buildings that were designed for office, actually, we're going to invest and make them available to be housing, which
they'll probably do apartments.
You're going to have, you got to change everything, the plumbing, the electricity, but you could do it.
You know what? I always thought, I don't know if you remember this, Mike, but a few years back, maybe 5 years back, they tried to make downtown, and we have a little downtown like Times Square, a mini Times Square. I think that might be the revive that they were hoping for, versus charging people to drive into downtown like they try to do as well. But it's, one thing is true. The city will always survive way beyond you and I's lives, and people will reinvent the wheel and redo it. And San Francisco is such a treasure, and it's beautiful if it's done right. I don't think there's a city out there that can compete with what San Francisco offers on their championship team day or on their best performance. Meaning, like, if they're performing at the highest level on all fronts, the cleanliness, the police force, the restaurants, the weather's been getting better, in my opinion. There's nothing like it. But when you have these bad apples or these components and continue for so long, it just decays the city. But
I will tell you that from what I'm seeing now, the pendulum is swinging back the other way. It's going there. It's going to take some time, but you are going to start seeing the changes coming to the city of San Francisco that have been long coming for a while.
Overdue.
But the climate is now getting right to say enough is enough. They will fix these issues. Once you get through all the red tape, politics, bureaucracy, it's starting to chip away where people are saying, okay, I've seen the light. We got to do something.
It's almost like 9/11. People are like, doesn't matter your politics, doesn't matter your viewpoint, doesn't matter where you're from. People are just fed up with the wrong. They see the wrong and they relate on that and they say, hey, we got to work together versus like point fingers and have meaningless arguments, right?
Correct.
Yeah, I don't know, Mike. I really enjoyed this episode. I hope you did as well. Usually you're on the other side.
This was a blast to be on this side, to get that experience where I don't have to worry about checking all the monitors and the cameras. Are they working? It's all being done for me. So it's nice to just be able to have a conversation and not have to worry about the whole technical side of it. So Simon, thank you for letting me come on. Great experience.
Guys, thank you so much for watching. Thanks to Mike for being on the podcast. I truly appreciate it. Again, this is his first podcast. My first podcast was on his show, and it's just been an incredible time. We got to chat a lot about things that we find important. I'm sure we could have went into some deep topics, which we maybe will do on a follow-up on his or mine. But I hope you enjoyed it. Remember to like, subscribe if you haven't done so already. Check out Real Talks on the Rocks on YouTube. I'll link it below. I'll also link Mike's Instagram here. He's a hard worker. He is Batman. He puts on his uniform during the day. At night, he's editing, and he does it all himself. What a nice man. Thanks, Mike, for coming. I truly appreciate it. It's my honor, and
thank you, Simon. This was great.
Thank you.
All right.